Hello everybody, my name is JoyofCrimeArt, and growing up, one of my favorite cartoons was the Powerpuff Girls. Created by Craig McCracken and premiering on Cartoon Network in 1998, the Powerpuff Girls follows the adventure of three superpowered little girls, Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup, as they protect the city of Townsville from evil. There's just something about the show that always drew me in when I was little, even compared to other cartoons I was also a fan of. It just felt like the show had a little something for everyone. It was cute and girly, but also was funny and action-packed. It was pure wish fulfillment for a kid, but was also clever and witty enough for an adult to enjoy as well. And I think it was this broad appeal that led the series to reach the level of success that it did. And boy oh boy was this show a success, quickly becoming one of the most popular shows on the channel, spawning a myriad of merchandise, video games, and even a theatrical film. I loved the show growing up, and even today I can say it still holds up really well. But nothing can last forever, as in 2005 the Powerpuff Girls came to an end after an impressive 6-season run. Cartoon Network was actually willing to greenlight a 7th season, but it was Craig McCracken himself who decided to end the series, believing that the show had run its course and wanted to end while it was still good, which is really commendable.
We would hate to continue making a show when we're just kind of hitting the same notes and repeating ourselves. We wanted to kind of go out while it still was good.
And then 7 days later, Powerpuff Girls Z was announced.
We're done when I say we're done.
Yeah, with a franchise as popular and financially lucrative as the Powerpuff Girls, there was no way that Cartoon Network was just gonna let it die. Which is why in 2008 we got Powerpuff Girls Z, an anime adaptation of the Powerpuff Girls created as a co-production between Cartoon Network and Toei Animation, the animation company behind such acclaimed series as Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, and, most relevantly for this topic, Sailor Moon. As while the original series mainly went for a Hanna-Barbera/UPA vibe with a bit of Adam West Batman sprinkled in, this spin-off would go in a completely different direction, taking on much more of a magical girl influence. I mean, in some ways it made sense. The Powerpuff Girls always had a bit of a retro Japanese influence, and because of that the series was especially popular in Asia. So making a Powerpuff Girls series specifically designed to appeal to that market does make sense. I mean, it feels like nowadays Western companies are constantly trying to take their beloved IPs and adapt them into anime. So in a lot of ways, it kind of feels like Powerpuff Girls Z was ahead of the curve on this one. But on the other hand, like, I don't know, I can't be the only one who thinks this is just kind of weird, right? Well, clearly I wasn't the only one who thought so, because while it's hard to figure out exactly how well the series did in Japan, it was absolutely hated by audiences here in the West when it first came out, with people saying it went against everything that the original series stood for, turning a funny and action-packed superhero show that could appeal to anyone into just another generic, marketable girls show designed to sell merchandise. However, as time went on, it feels like the reputation of the series began to shift, with more and more people seeming to look back on the series fondly as its own thing. You hear that, Powerpuff Girls 2016? There's still hope for you yet. Personally, the show was always a weird anomaly to me growing up. I was always aware of its existence, and I even tried watching a few episodes of it at one point, but for the most part, I had very little connection to the series prior to working on this review, but I was always curious about it. And as odd as the series may seem, I'm actually open to seeing a different interpretation of the Powerpuff Girls. I mean, I'm one of those freaks who likes the 2016 reboot after all, so I think that puts me in an interesting position to talk about the series. Does the Powerpuff Girls Z live up to the high standards of its predecessor? Or is it yet another poorly made reboot that fails to understand what made the original so great in the first place? That's what I wanted to find out for myself. So let's dive in and talk about Powerpuff Girls Z, the other controversial Powerpuff Girls reboot. But before we talk about Powerpuff Girls Z, it's best to go over the series' history and how it came to be. And boy oh boy, buckle in because this is going to be a trip. So the first question you probably have about this series, other than just why, would probably be, how involved was Craig McCracken with this series? And the answer is, not much. He was involved in a couple of meetings early on, but overall the series was mostly done without his involvement. Especially back in the day, there was this rumor circling around the internet that Craig McCracken absolutely hated the series. Though this piece of art created by Craig himself in 2007 seems to paint a different picture. In it, he talks about his excitement at being able to experience the Powerpuff Girls for the first time as a fan as opposed to as a creator, even drawing this cute piece of fan art of the original girls dressed up as their Z counterpart. Aww, that's adorable. And then in 2016 he made a tweet saying that he's barely even seen the series.
You sit on a throne of lies.
While information about Powerpuff Girls Z's development is scarce, it seems like there was a lot of discussion early on about exactly what type of style and tone the series would be, with some early concept art being much more in line with the original series art style. There's also this teaser trailer shown at Tokyo Anime Festival that seemingly showed the series taking on a more action-oriented approach. But in the end, it was the more shoujo magical girl-inspired style that won out, with Miho Shinagasa, an anime director on Sailor Moon, being hired on as the main character designer. It's pretty apparent that Cartoon Network was more concerned with the series appealing to the Japanese audience above everything else. Heck, it didn't even premiere on Cartoon Network initially. It premiered on TV Tokyo, the channel responsible for airing tons of other popular anime series like Pokemon, Naruto, Spy X Family, and My Beloved. Though reruns would air on Cartoon Network in Japan as well as other Southeast Asian territories. An English dub was also produced, being dubbed by Blue Ocean.
So now he needs a giant robot just to steal a piece of fruit? I guess he must be really hungry. Come on, you guys. Okay.
However, despite the English dub existing, it never got an official American release. I had to watch the series illegally in order to make this review, as you can tell by the footage, which is something I never do, but I legitimately couldn't find any official way to watch the series otherwise. Powerpuff Girls Z was originally announced to air here in America, I think. This old blog article from 2008 says that a US premiere was announced at the Atlanta Anime Convention, but all the sources provided just lead to dead links or websites that had their domain bought out years ago. But given the fact that sources were cited in the first place, I'm going to assume that this was true. But why wasn't Powerpuff Girls Z brought over? Well, there's no way to know for sure, but if I had to hazard a guess, I would say it probably would have to do with the state of Cartoon Network at the time, as 2008 was the year that Cartoon Network really started to move away from anime in general. However, it should be noted that 2008 was the 10-year anniversary of the original Powerpuff Girls series, and Cartoon Network went all out for it, releasing the complete series on DVD, airing a multi-day marathon of the show leading up to the anniversary, and premiering the Powerpuff Girls Rule, a new half-hour Powerpuff Girls special made by Craig McCracken himself. So you would think that with Cartoon Network doing all of this to celebrate the Powerpuff Girls 10-year anniversary, and with the dub of Powerpuff Girls Z being released internationally around the same time, I don't know, you just think something would have come from that. That being said though, after seeing the series myself, I can see why Cartoon Network may have been hesitant about bringing it over. Outside of Sailor Moon, magical girl anime have never really had that much success here in the West. Given how much backlash the series already had from pre-existing fans, in addition to the general landscape of Cartoon Network at the time, yeah, I don't really see the series doing very well had it come over. But enough about the series history, let's get into the show itself. I chose to watch this series subbed. I usually prefer to watch dubbed anime when given the option, but I chose the sub version in this case because there are actual substantial differences between the two, as the dubbed version is actually censored. The United States and Japan have pretty different standards on what's allowed on kids programming, with the series premiering on TV Tokyo as opposed to Cartoon Network, it meant that the original Japanese version could get away with a little bit more. Things like light swearing and public urination, you know, stuff like that. Plus, the dub actually went in and changed some aspects of the series in order to make it more in line with the original. I guess in an attempt to make the series more palatable to a Western audience. But personally, if I'm gonna watch such a weird and bonkers adaptation of a series that I love, then I might as well watch the weirdest and most bonkers version of it possible, right? I want the authentic Powerpuff Girls Z experience. Our series opens up with Professor Utonium alongside his son Ken and robot dog Peach working in the laboratory. You know, Ken and Peach, everyone's favorite Powerpuff Girl characters. All is well, until when, all of a sudden, a giant iceberg appears right outside of Tokyo. Dang it, Al Gore tried to warn us, but we just didn't listen!
We didn't listen!
Ken blasts the iceberg with a laser beam powered by a mysterious element known as Chemical Z, destroying the iceberg, but in the process shooting white beams of light all across the city, with the white beams of light hitting three 13-year-old middle school girls, Momoko, Mayako, and Kaoru, transforming them into the superheroes Hyper Blossom, Rolling Bubbles, and Powered Buttercup. Unfortunately, the beams also sent black beams of light across the city too, creating various villains as well. So now our trio of middle school girls must dedicate their lives to fighting crime and the forces of evil as Powerpuff Girls Z. Yeah, so as you can clearly see, this is a very different setup than the original series had. Like I said earlier, the English dub actually tried to alter some of these aspects in order to make the series more in line with the original, like changing the setting from Tokyo to New Townsville, and straight up renaming Momoko, Mayako, and Kaoru as just Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup. Which yes, does mean that in the English dub, nobody can put together that Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup and Hyper Blossom, Rolling Bubbles, and Powered Buttercup are the same people. But there were some elements that are just too plot important for the dub to change. Not only are the girls older and have secret identities now, but they weren't even created by Professor Utonium in this version. Heck, they're not even sisters, which does sort of feel like it's going against one of the central themes of the original series. Apparently the reason the professor isn't the girl's father in this version was due to the fact that being a single parent, especially a single father, isn't nearly as normalized in Japan as it is here in the West. In fact, the professor wasn't even originally supposed to be in the show at all, it was just supposed to be Ken. It was Craig McCracken who insisted that the professor be included, believing that the girls needed some kind of a father figure, which as far as I can tell was his only real contribution made to the series. So the studio decided on a compromise, having both the professor and Ken in the series, with Ken being the professor's biological son, which doesn't really solve anything because the professor is still basically a single father. He's just Ken's father now instead of the girls. You sort of get around this by showing that the professor does still have a wife, who's an astronaut living on a space station. So the professor isn't really a single father, his wife just isn't around most of the time. Well then why could he have been the girl's father then? And heck, if you didn't want the girls to be created in a lab, you could just have it so that the 3 girls were the professor's biological daughters, who all just happened to get hit by the white beams of light, giving them their powers. Like, I'm not upset about the change, I'm mostly just baffled by the reasoning behind it. But beyond that, the professor in the series is pretty close to his 98 counterpart, being an intelligent yet kind of dorky role model to the girls. Though I will say, some of the scenes where he goes all overprotective dad mode do feel a bit odd given how he's not actually the girl's dad in this version, he's just the weird 40-year-old man they hang out with. He also doesn't do as much as he did in the original due to his role being shared with Ken, a know-it-all kid genius who is somewhat lacking in social skills due to being homeschooled his whole life. Ken's inclusion in the show may be odd, but he's not a bad character, and while he's much more subdued, this is probably the closest we'll ever get to seeing the Powerpuff Girls and Dexter hanging out in any official capacity. The professor and Ken both end up fulfilling very similar roles, acting as the girls' mission control, so to speak. You can kind of tell that both characters were created without the intention of the other existing alongside them. And then we have Peach, or Poochie in the English dub, a toy robot dog that was also hit by the white beams of light, bringing him to life and giving him the ability to detect villains who are powered by the black light. He's literally a combination of the talking dog and the frickin' hotline phone. I have no idea why Peach is here, other than so the series can have a cute, marketable mascot. Oh come on, Fuzzy Lumpkins was right there! But how are the actual girls themselves? First we have Momoko, aka Hyper Blossom. In the original, Blossom was a smart and responsible leader of the group, and comparing the OG Blossom to this Blossom, well, I'd say the only similarities between the two is their names, but that's not even true. Yeah, Blossom in this show is practically nothing like her original 98 counterpart. In this series, Blossom is a boy-crazy, sweet-obsessed Super Sentai fan who honestly is probably the least competent and most self-serving out of all 3 of the girls. Pretty much the opposite of how she was in the original. It's pretty clear that when modeling Blossom's personality for the series, they were more inspired by the types of leads you would find in your standard Magical Girl series, as opposed to her 1998 counterpart. That being said though, while her selfishness and ineptitude can be annoying in some episodes, she's not a bad character. She's just a completely different character than she was in the original. Next we have Mayako, aka Rolling Bubbles. In the original, Bubbles was the most girly and sensitive member of the group, and those traits carry over here, though a lot of her traits have been tweaked a bit to reflect the fact that the girls are older now. Like for instance here, Bubbles' dream is to become a fashion designer, and she's incredibly popular with all the boys in school. I feel like these changes work and feel like a natural evolution for the character. The biggest change I would say between this version of Bubbles and the original is that while in the original Bubbles was probably the most childish member of the group, this version honestly feels the most mature. She comes across almost kind of stoic at times, which I think comes from the voice acting. But I think this still works, and there are still enough silly moments where the character still feels like Bubbles. And finally we have Kaoru, or Powered Buttercup. The original Buttercup was the toughest and most tomboyish member of the group, and those traits still carry over here. I say that out of the 3 girls, Buttercup is probably the one who's changed the least. The only real difference being that this version of Buttercup feels significantly less violent and battle-happy than the original, instead being a lot more snarky. Overall, I do like our leads, though it's kind of odd how Bubbles and Buttercup feel pretty similar to their original counterparts, while Blossom is pretty much just a whole new character, but I think it's an interesting interpretation. I mean, the show is a reboot after all. I don't want the characters to act exactly like how they did in the original, that would be boring. So I'm glad that this show was able to do something a little bit different. The girls in the series have a tendency to alternate between feeling way more powerful than their original counterparts and feeling incredibly nerfed. They're still powerful, obviously. I mean, they break the moon in half in one episode, which might surpass any singular feat the girls had in the original series. But in terms of powers, they pretty much just fly and hit things, Blossom doesn't have her ice breath. We only see them use their heat vision once, and even I'm not even sure if that was supposed to be seen as literal or just an exaggerated animation thing for the sake of a gag. In the place of these powers, however, all three girls have their own special magical girl weapon. Blossom has a yo-yo, Bubbles has a bubble wand, and Buttercup has an actual weapon. These are the main things our heroes use to fight, which does result in a lot of the action scenes to come across a bit lamer than they did in the original, but it's cute and quirky and fits the overall magical girl aesthetic, so it's not the worst change. Powerpuff Girls Z keeps with the Powerpuff Girl tradition of the girls oftentimes causing just as many problems as they stop, which I unironically appreciate. Despite being older, the girls honestly feel a lot more incompetent here than their original counterparts. Part of that honestly probably has to do with the overall tone that Powerpuff Girls Z has. This is a very goofy and lighthearted series. Sure, we get some dramatic episodes every once in a while, but for the most part the action is downplayed in favor of the comedy. So while the girls come across as fairly incompetent, so does everyone else, so it kind of balances out. We have our supporting characters too, like the mayor, Miss Bella, Miss Keen, who are all pretty similar to their original counterparts. And then you have our villains, most of whom gain their powers via the black light that came from the iceberg, which I'm kind of mixed on. On one hand, it makes everything a lot simpler and results in our villains having actual origins, something that most of the villains in the original lacked. Though I'd be lying if I said having all the villains' origins connected doesn't result in a lot of them feeling a bit samey. To start things off, we have Mojo Jojo, who, like Blossom, is pretty much a completely new character here, being a lot more inept than his 98 or even his 2016 counterpart. He honestly feels more like Emperor Pilaf than Mojo Jojo. Though judging him as his own character completely separate from the original, he can be kind of amusingly pathetic. He also has this one-sided romance with Miss Keen of all characters. Yeah, that's a recurring through line. I guess they were trying to go for like a King Kong thing. Doesn't make it any less weird though.
He's pulling his cock out!
Most of the other villains, however, are pretty on brand with how they were in the original. Villains like Fuzzy Lumpkins and the Gangrene Gang are pretty much the same. Same with the Amoeba Boys, though they did gender swap Slim. I know, the Powerpuff Girls Z went woke! Some villains are a bit different, however, like Sedusa and Princess Morbucks, who rather than being just normal villains, are actually evil split personalities caused by the black light. I don't really get why these two are split personalities while the other villains aren't. It's not very consistent or explained very well, and if anything, I feel like it causes it to become a lot harder to work these characters into stories, but it does introduce some neat ideas. For instance, in this version, Sedusa is actually a quiet and plain girl named Sakurako, but whenever she experiences intense feelings of jealousy and uses her blacklight-infused lipstick, she transforms into the villainous Sedusa. A bit convoluted, but still a neat take on the character, and honestly makes her pretty sympathetic, though I admit it does become a bit contrived at times, as I have to keep finding new reasons for Sakurako to feel insecure about herself in order to cause her to turn into Sedusa. They do a similar thing with Princess, or Himiko. Whenever Himiko pulls her cat's tail, she turns into the villainous princess. Okay, at least with Sedusa being a split personality served the narrative, what's your excuse? Like Sedusa, Princess in the series is also painted in a bit more of a sympathetic light, with her having an older sister named Miko, who is the favorite of her parents, due to being perfect at pretty much everything. Which explains why Himiko is such a brat. She uses her ego as a way to mask her insecurities. I admit that the show doesn't really go that much in depth with any of this. This isn't really the type of series you go to for complex character analysis, and the show itself isn't always super consistent with Himiko being seen as the unfavorite to her parents, but still it's another good change that makes this version of the character more unique. It's so weird to me that Princess Morbucks is the most consistently good part of the Powerpuff Girls franchise. The Rowdy Rough Boys are also different in this version, or maybe not different enough, as they're still kids in this version. Not kindergarten age kids like in the original, but still significantly younger than the girls are. Like, I'm not a big Powerpuff Girl x Rowdy Rough Boy shipper or anything, but even I feel like this was a wasted opportunity. While every villain in this series is significantly less threatening than their original counterparts, the Rowdy Rough Boys were hit particularly hard by this, going from one of the girls' most powerful foes to pretty much just the sorts of gross out jokes, which is a pretty big downgrade. And finally, we have him. I kinda like what the show did with him. They don't introduce him until about halfway into the series run, but after he's introduced, he kind of becomes the main villain of the series, with him in this version being an ancient demon who was sealed away centuries ago. Once him is revived, the series gains more of a serialized plot, with the girls trying to find a way to defeat him before he can regain all of his power, while him uses his dark magic to create new monsters in order to defeat the girls. He's the Hawk Moth of the show. While Mojo was always the main villain of the original series, him was always treated like the bigger threat. Like when you got a him episode, you knew things were about to get real. So having him act as the big overarching final boss villain of the series is a pretty cool take on the character, especially since the original series series didn't really have much in the way of continuity. Sure, him is nowhere near as threatening as he was in the original, but he's still probably the most threatening villain the girls in the series end up facing. And I like the way they incorporate these jester elements into his design. It fits the character well, they could have gone without the flesh-colored skin. Overall, the villains of the series are okay. They do some interesting stuff with a lot of them, though by and large they do just kind of feel like goofier and less competent versions of the villains from the 98 series. Let's talk about the series comedy. It's okay. It can honestly be pretty funny at times, but overall I would say this is probably the least funny incarnation of the Powerpuff Girls. That's right, the Powerpuff Girls 2016 has some really funny moments. I will die on this hill.
And why is Robin being chased by a lion?
She knows why.
The animation is a bit of a mixed bag. The actual character designs are great. For the most part, again, I'm not a big fan of the flesh-colored skin, but I think Maiho Shinagasa managed to find a good balance between the Sojo magical girl aesthetic and a more cartoony look in line with the original series. A good balance of Eastern and Western sensibilities. The characters still look recognizable, but still stand out enough to feel unique, like you can clearly tell these are the Powerpuff Girl Z versions of these characters. However, the actual animation isn't the greatest. To be fair, I wouldn't call it bad. And granted, it's not like the other two Powerpuff Girls series have the most stellar animation either, but they don't really go that ambitious with it outside of a few scenes. That is with the exception of the girls' magical girl transformation sequence, which is good because you're going to be seeing these sequences at least once an episode, minimum. And they're pretty long, but if you're watching a magical girl anime, then you should know this comes with the territory. The kind of average animation does hurt a lot of the action sequences. Only a couple really stand out in hindsight, but with a show this lighthearted, I don't think it's really that much of a loss. One thing I can praise though is the music. The OST goes surprisingly hard, with heavy J-pop and J-rock influence. I like how there are 4 versions of the Powerpuff Girls transformation theme, one for each girl and one for when they all transform together, with each version being the same, but being played in different ways to match the girls' personalities. I could listen to the Bubbles theme all day. Powerpuff Girls Z ran for 52 episodes before coming to an end, which while being a pretty impressive run, is a fair bit shorter than the other two Powerpuff Girls series, but I think it was probably a pretty good time to stop. By the end of Powerpuff Girls Z's run, you could honestly tell they were starting to run out of ideas. What am I looking at right now? Honestly, these later episodes might be my favorite, as the series just becomes more and more unhinged as time goes on. But as for Powerpuff Girls Z as a whole, I would say that the series is okay. I'd say I probably put it about on par with the 2016 reboot. But remember, I actually like this 2016 reboot, so that's not the burn you might think it is. I will say, Powerpuff Girls Z is a very odd adaptation. There are some aspects that feel very faithful to the original series, some aspects that honestly feels like they almost predicted the 2016 series, and some aspects that feel like it was just the writers making stuff up. There are definitely things about the series that I really do like. The character designs are really appealing, the soundtrack is great, the show can have some genuinely funny moments and ideas, but mostly I just respect for how committed they were with this absolutely bonkers premise. Like, I feel like if Powerpuff Girls Z were made today, they probably would be much more of an effort to stay closer to the roots of the source material. And while I wouldn't mind seeing a Powerpuff Girls anime that was more in line with the original series, I kind of appreciate just how bizarre this interpretation is. But for as weird as some of the changes were, and how bad the idea of a Powerpuff Girls magical girl anime might sound on paper, I think the fact that they were able to take that concept and make anything even halfway decent is impressive. Which is why I think the show was able to grow the cult following that it did despite the initial backlash. While I'm sure the series was initially conceived as just a way to capitalize on the Powerpuff Girls' overseas success, I never got the impression that people behind the series weren't passionate about what they were doing. There's enough random deep-cut references to the original series sprinkled throughout this lead me to believe that the people behind the show really were at least fans of the original series, and were trying to do their best to make a worthy successor. even if not every element managed to come together 100%. It's a shame that the series isn't more widely available though. Sure, I don't think the series would have done that well had it aired on Cartoon Network in 2008, but I would love to see this series get a release on Max or something, or at the very least a physical release. The Powerpuff Girls Z is far from a perfect series. It definitely has its issues, and if you're not a die-hard Powerpuff Girl fan, I doubt you're really gonna get much out of it, because when you strip all the Powerpuff Girl stuff away, it's a pretty generic run-of-the-mill magical girl series that you can probably find better equivalents to elsewhere. But if you are a die-hard Powerpuff Girl fan, and are open to something a little bit different, I would recommend giving Powerpuff Girls Z a shot. It may not be the Powerpuff Girls you grew up with, but if you go into the series with the right mindset, it can be a pretty enjoyable time. It really is amazing to me just how unique each incarnation of the Powerpuff Girls really is from one another, and I think that's what makes the Powerpuff Girls such a good contender to be a franchise. Sure, you need the girls, the villains, and the basic setup, but when it comes to the tone, art style, heck, even the girls' personalities, you can kind of do whatever you want with it. I mean, say what you want about the 2016 show and Z, but at least they stand out. And I'm glad that the crew behind Z were able to put their own weird spin on the franchise, because Moto Jojo showing Miss Keen as Ape Wang is something that I will remember for the rest of my life. Have you seen the Powerpuff Girls Z? And if so, what did you think of it? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I genuinely want to hear what you all think. And if you like this video, feel free to like it, subscribe, and consider checking out my Patreon if you want to see more videos like it. And as always, have a great day.